Okay, so we've been talking about Satori, enlightenment, for this retreat. There's so many things that come to mind when I think of these words. In Japanese, there's 3 different Chinese characters that have been translated as enlightenment. And all 3 of these have different nuances. So we have this idea of enlightenment. But I think this word itself is a problem, like Chosang has mentioned. It's kind of a problem because it's coming from our Western view of things, our Western understanding. Whatever that word enlightenment means, I'm not sure. But if we look at the individual Chinese characters, we get three different characters, and they all mean something slightly different. The first one is Satori, the Chinese character for Satori, and can also be pronounced Go, G-O. And it has to do with opening, literally the character means to open the senses, the 6 senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, to open them, and actually mind or heart, to open them up. And that's kind of what we're doing, when we're sitting in this retreat, whether we're sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, we're opening our senses. We're opening our body, opening our ears, eyes. We're opening ourselves up in some way. It also means to realize. Satori means to realize. The second character has to do with waking up. And the character itself, the Chinese character, includes in it seeing, the character for to see, which is an eye, the physical eye, with 2 legs on it, meaning movement. So, waking up is another, and that's kaku in Japanese, kaku. And from that perspective, we're waking up to the fact that we're not awake in many cases. It's also a kind of realization. It's also a kind of realizing something. For me, I'll get to the third one, but for me, I remember the first time I met my teacher, and I didn't think of this in terms of enlightenment, and I certainly don't think of myself as an enlightened being at all. But when I first met my teacher, it was in a chapel at Bucknell University. A beautiful little space, had windows surrounding it, kind of these, I don't know if it wasn't stained glass, but you couldn't open them. They were it's like that wavy glass, you can't see through it, but there's light. You can see the light coming through, but you can't make out anything on the other side very clearly. It was this very intimate chapel. It's called the Rook Chapel. Red carpet. We sat in a circle, and she showed the group of us that was there, just a few of us. There was maybe about 3 or 4 people there. And she explained how to do zazen, how to do sitting meditation. And she pulled out this book, and the book itself blew me away. It's called Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. So to me, this kind of, what for me was a realization is kind of this, what we're doing on an individual level is a kind of a revolution of our awareness. We were evolving our awareness from an outward focus, an external focus, to more of an internal focus in a sense. I have to be careful here. But if you think about it, our culture has this kind of constantly desiring something more, something outside. And of course we want to be somebody and go somewhere. But you can only do that if you know the complete opposite, being nobody and going nowhere. So it's this being able to turn around, turn the light of our awareness around. And can we be the opposite? Can we do the opposite? Can we go in the opposite direction? So what moves us in the opposite direction of where we're headed? Kind of turning us around. And this is not just for individuals. We tend to think of this. We have to be really careful because especially as Westerners, such an individualistic society that we live in. Everything's about me and my own individual development and growth and all that. And that's good to a point. But enlightenment is not just about the individual. And this revolution, this is a word that we can also use. I think it's useful for an entire culture. How do we revolve a revolution of an entire way of an entire culture? Because enlightenment is not just about one person waking up. That's the whole Mahayana Buddhist path. Mahayana means the great vehicle in which all beings wake up together. All beings realize together. And the Bodhisattva path is the path of continuing to come back again and again to this life, whether that means lifetime after lifetime or just showing up again and again in order to make that revolution even before you yourself revolve, in a sense. Even before you yourself turn to help others, to aid others in doing that. And we live in such divisive times right now. It's just, you can just feel the split. Are there any Republicans in the room? But see, that's what I mean. Where are they? It's been helpful for me, especially since the last presidential election. I think you can really feel a palpable kind of pain. I feel it. So, I got so upset at the turn of events. I thought our society was moving in a certain direction, and that was a kind of revolution, and it was a revolution in the wrong direction as far as my limited perspective goes. But it's also a kind of a revolution in the right direction because it helped me to wake up to see that, wait a minute, whatever I have been doing up to this point, I thought things were going in the right way, but I have to turn a different direction here. And one of the things that has been really helpful for me is this point of listening to others, making it a point to listen. I've been reading about this and making, really, I've been hearing again and again how people have been reaching across divides and actually making progress in changing people, in lessening hate by simply allowing the other person to speak and to hear what they're saying. To really hear it, even if you don't agree with it. You don't have to agree with it, but not to argue back. And again, you don't have to agree with it, but just listen. Listen to the other's perspective. And I'm not talking about through media. I'm talking about like face-to-face, like getting up close to somebody, asking the hard questions, and hearing what the other person is afraid of, hearing their fears. And when a person really gets heard, a lot of times they all change. But if we want, my teacher often said, if we want somebody else to change, then the only way to make that happen is for us to change. As hard as that might seem, we might think, I've already changed. I've done enough changing. It's time for them. But it's like a glass that's half full of water, and the air saying to the water, I want you to come up here. And the water saying to the air, I want you to come down here. And neither one moves. They're just stuck there. The only way for the air to go down and the water to go up is for the glass to go upside down. And then there's no way you cannot have the air go down and the water go up. That's and it's an analogy for ourselves. It's an analogy for us. And particularly, forget about the national scene. I mean, that's important too, but just forget about just in our neighborhood. And I'm the first one to say I need to do more work here. Meeting my own neighbors, knowing who's in my backyard, just meeting people, knowing people here, getting to know them. Last night was wonderful. I got to meet a whole new group of people because I decided to play water polo at the end of a swim. These guys invited me, and I didn't know who they were. Okay, yeah. So looking for opportunities like that, or maybe just at the grocery store when you're seeing somebody you don't know. Make it a practice. Make it a practice to meet people. I'm probably the worst example. I'm such an introvert. I'm happy to just stay locked in my room, close the door, and do nothing. But to make it a practice, like meeting people that you don't know, whether it's at work or in public spaces, and just listen to them. And by listening, one of the ways of listening is somebody knows that they've been heard when you can repeat back, you can echo back what they say. So if you hear what they say, and then try to remember it, and then you return it. You say, oh, so you said ... And that helps people to know that they've been listened to. Helps them to really see that, oh, somebody's hearing what I'm saying, and somebody cares about me. I think we need care more than anything now in our world. We need to show that we love each other. We need to show that we care about each other. So the third character for enlightenment that's been translated as enlightenment is the word sho, S-H-O in Japanese, sho. And it means to verify, to verify something. I like that one too. It has to do with the left-hand side of the character is the radical for word or speak. And the right part of it is the character for correct. So literally means correct speech. But it also means to prove something, to prove it or to verify it. And that's what we're doing when we're sitting here, when we're walking, when we're laying down. We're checking things out for ourselves. Now, that's what the Buddha wants us to do, has wanted his disciples to do. And that's the tradition that we carry on. It's like, check these teachings out for yourself and see, what is actually going on here? Can I apply them to my life in this moment? Moment after moment after moment after moment. Not just once, but what happens if I apply these teachings? These teachings of all things are impermanent. Nothing stays. This body, this mind is impermanent. There's no self here. There's no self to be found. Who's the knower? Are we? When we really look closely, there is both these two teachings. One is that we can watch our thoughts and disengage from our thoughts. That's one way. We can watch our feelings and disengage from them and be the one that watches, be the observer. That's one way. The other way is to become those things, to become fully, to enter into the stream of thought, to enter into the stream of feelings, so that there is no knower and there's no knowing. You just enter in fully. Sometimes it's helpful to do this when we're half asleep, because then our brain isn't so awake. Sometimes the more awake our brain is, the more difficult it is for us to just go into it. We start to think too much. We just go into the flow of it. Go into the flow of the feeling so that there is no feeler and feeling. There's just this. Right? So there's two ways, there's two ways to do this. It kind of depends on where we are in this moment. So my teacher has been sharing with me her love of a Japanese poet named Santoka. So I want to share a little bit with you about Santoka. Santoka, he's famous in Japan nowadays for his poetry, his haiku, and he started out writing the traditional haiku. I believe it's 575 syllables, 3 lines, and then he broke away from that based on a particular school of thought that had developed in his lifetime. So his years are 1882 to 1940. 1882 to 1940. That gives you a sense of when he lived. This is one of his early. This is one of his poems. His haiku. He says, "Ano kumo ga otoshita ame ni nureteru." Okay. Did you get that? Yeah, ame. Ame kumo, rain cloud. Kumo. Ga otoshita ame ni nureteru. The cloud dropped the rain. I'm getting wet in. Those clouds way up there, they come down and they get us wet. You know? The water that's up there in the sky comes down. The water that, when we turn the faucet on, the water comes out. That water was up in the sky. We think it comes from the faucet or comes from a pipe. Maybe it was underground for a while. But all the way up there, it comes down and it touches us. And there's no separation between, in this kind of Asian cosmology, between heaven and earth. There's no separation between heaven and earth. And human beings are kind of the conduits between knowing the will of heaven and bringing that into our life on earth. This kind of non-separation, complete connection. So Santoka is really an interesting person. Very, very pained. Very pained. One of the things that I do is I just love working with people with mental health, in mental health. So I every week for the past close to 4 years, I've been going down to Broadlawns, to the SANS unit there, and teaching yoga for people in the mental health, inpatient mental health, outpatient mental health, and addiction treatment. And I started doing this actually in Pennsylvania. We were asked to offer meditation and yoga at an addiction treatment center. And it helps me so much, to keep this practice grounded. We talk about Satori, Enlightenment, all this great stuff. And it's easy to get disconnected from people who are suffering a lot. It's easy to forget that they're part of us. That's who we are. That's who I am. When I go into a mental health ward, I'm looking at myself. Addiction isn't something just for people with drug and alcohol problem. Addiction is any time we find ourselves not where we want to be and doing something that helps us in the short run but affects us poorly in the long run. That's one definition of addiction, is anything that it brings benefit to us in the short run, but at the expense of the long run. It could be at the expense of our relationships, expense of our job. So if we broaden our understanding of addiction, I think our culture as a whole is very addicted to many different things. Workaholism is huge. Of course, drug and alcohol is an epidemic. Internet addiction, pornography addiction, all of these things. Food addiction, Or we can just name them. And so underlying all of these addictions are, I think, trauma underlies many of them. And it took me a while to figure that out. Our culture sends this message that just say no. Just say no and have discipline, mental discipline, and you'll be okay. You won't succumb to addiction. But if you try that cigarette, you're going to be addicted right away. That's nonsense. People who don't have that kind of background trauma don't get addicted in the same way that people who have a underlying history of that, particularly early childhood. And there's also generational trauma. Trauma moves through us genetically. And so we take on the traumas of our parents and our grandparents, our great-grandparents. And we come into this world with a certain degree of pain. And it's only natural to want to end it. That's why we're here. That's what the Buddha's teaching was about. It was about, he said, I teach one thing and one thing only, that there is suffering and that there's an end to suffering. It's just that, as Shantideva says, we go about ending suffering in the wrong way. Right? We go about the wrong way. And we don't always know that. But for an addict, somebody's, heroin or alcohol, they're in so much pain they don't know what to do. Drink. Shoot it up. You want to feel better. It's just like you got an itch. What do? You want to scratch it. We just may not have access to other resources to help us here. The opposite, one person says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Connecting to each other. And again, our society is so disconnected in so many ways, and the internet doesn't help. So how do we get more connected with each other? Santoka, he was born into a wealthy family, similar to the Buddha, similar to Dogen. Zen Master Dogen was born into an aristocratic family. The Buddha was born a prince. You think about all of these great people, and they're a lot of times born into wealth. And at the same time, the Buddha lost his mother at birth. He didn't know his mother. Dogen lost both of his parents at a very early age. He was an orphan. Muhammad, the prophet, also was an orphan at a very young age. We know that Jesus didn't have a father. Right? That's supposed to be a joke. But Santoka, his mother committed suicide when he was only like 9 or 10 years old. She did it by throwing herself into a well, and he saw her being pulled out. It's hard even to go there with your mind, so I won't ask you to imagine it. But I just think about that. And to be a child to witness that. His brother, when Santoka was in his 30s, committed suicide successfully. The family lost all of their wealth. He went into college, kind of mid-20s, and he started drinking then. Here's somebody who had devastating loss, and we think, oh, this happened when he was 9 or 10. He should be over it by the time he's 25. But that's just ridiculous. This is a kind of a wound that stays with somebody for their whole life. And unless that gets kind of, who knows? But for him, he took to drinking, and he was an alcoholic. He became an alcoholic from that point. There was something there that eased his pain, numbed his pain. And he tried to take his own life. He was unsuccessful at it. He threw himself in front of a train, in fact. And the train conductor saw him in time and was able to stop the train. And then a friend took him to a Buddhist temple where he began to live and practice for some time, and apparently helped him out quite a bit. He ordained as a Soto Zen monk. And it's not really clear to me. I kind of don't think he ever received transmission. He didn't stay long enough, probably. But he began to wander. And this is kind of very odd for this time in history. 100 or 200 years earlier, you would have seen monks wandering through the countryside of Japan, the Tokugawa period before the Meiji Restoration in 1868. You may have seen monks wandering the countryside. They were itinerant monks, in Japan at this time, 300-400 years ago. So it was quite unusual for this particular person, Santoka, to take to wandering. He was considered, in his time, people despised him because he would beg for food, but it was for himself. Usually, when monks at that time, when they went on the alms round, they would beg for their for the community, or they would put all of the gifts together, and it would be for the Buddha and for the entire community. But he was doing it because he needed to eat, and that was kind of a despicable thing. But he spent some of his time, a couple of years actually, on the 88 Temple pilgrimage, just walking it. This is a pilgrimage around the island of Shikoku, around the perimeter, set up by a Shingon Buddhist priest named Kobo Daishin, I think around the 900s, 800s, 900s. And people walk that. My teacher actually walked it. It takes about 6 weeks to go on foot. Have you ever heard of it? Yeah, you can walk this pilgrimage. And so at this time he was walking, and you're considered like safe, basically. And people will take care of you. You'll be protected by the gods and the spirits on that path. People have been doing this for hundreds of years, going on this 88 temple pilgrimage, and he just did it, kept going around and around, staying at the temples, begging for food, and writing haiku along the way. Let me give you another one of his haiku. Autumn's come, aki to natta, zaso ni suaru. Autumn's come, I sit in the weeds. Autumn's come, I sit in the weeds. It's just so, when we think about that, the autumn, this is autumn right now, this season. The leaves are changing in that time in Japan too. Leaves are changing. The green foliage are becoming red. We see the leaves on the ground. It's just symbolic of impermanence. I sit in the weeds. That's our practice, is to sit. And the weeds are symbolic of our delusions, the weeds of our mind. And he may have been speaking about this very literally. Being out in the wide open nature, exposed to the elements. Whether we're exposed to the elements or not, we still get it. When we sit here, the weeds of our own mind arise. And this is how he framed it. There's something about framing our experience. People have been taking to haiku left and right. Non-Japanese too. Because it's a means to frame our reality. And when we can frame it in a short, boom, we can really frame it, get it right. There's something satisfying about that, regardless of how we feel. If we can name or can frame the experience we're having, put it in words. Sometimes we want to remove the words from our experience and just experience. And then there's other times when we want to actually put a name to it. And what better way to do that than through haiku? Here's another one. Yutte kurogi to netteta. Get that one? Okay. Drunk, I'd been asleep with the crickets. Drunk, I'd been asleep with the crickets. So even though, he's suffering greatly, he had some major trauma, or he was brought up by his grandmother, raised by his grandmother. He married and eventually got divorced. Not too long after, he was divorced. Failure in his family's wealth disappeared. He tried to find work in Tokyo. He was present for the great earthquake in Tokyo. He was there. And he was considered a socialist, and he was rounded up and put in jail by the police for a short time. So this is a person that knows suffering. He knows pain, and he doesn't come across as being some pure, innocent monk, priest, enlightened being. And that's real. He's really real. Drunk. I fell asleep with the crickets. And it gets us in touch with our own ordinary nature, our own deluded nature. Zen Master Dogen says, go into delusion. Be in your delusions. Be aware of your delusions. Be aware of it. Go into them. And even after his period of training in a monastery and then leaving in this haiku, I'm sure this haiku must have kept him sane. It must have been his, even more so than Buddhism or anything, it's just being able to recite the haiku itself was his religion. But there's backsliding, and he tried to commit suicide again after this, even after all of this. And that's what we do, as anybody who has an addiction problem. There's returning to it, and we think, oh, he just wasn't strong enough. He should have been better. No, people backslide. And pain can be very, very pronounced at times. He was unsuccessful at that time, and he returns to his haiku. And just like us with our practice, there's times when we practice, and then we let it go, and then we come back to it, and then we let it go. And even in the midst of practice, we let it go. We know our mind's wandering off here and there, and then we come back, and then we let it go. Our mind goes off into something else, and then we bring it back. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing again and again and again. So it's recognizing our own delusive nature, and then returning again to our Buddha nature, to our own wisdom. He published, actually, during his lifetime, he had books published and wrote voluminously. I think something like, I want to say like 15,000 poems, something like that. 15,000 poems, and that's not all of them. Apparently, some of them he burned. But he pilgrimaged around this 88 temple pilgrimage, but he also wandered. He wandered here and there, and sometimes there's stories of him, getting caught in a rainstorm, and nobody allowing him into their home. He finds a little shack someplace, and he's soaked with wet. He writes, the sound of the rain dripping has also grown old. Ever feel that? Like, we're sitting here and we're just like, when is this going to end? But then to also frame that, he's a real master at the sound of the rain dripping. Maybe at one time it sounded really beautiful. He really heard it. And then, and that grew old too. But then to say it gives it life again. And it gives meaning to this delusiveness, to the mundaneness of our life. It reinvigorates it. It resurrects it. That's the power of poetry. It resurrects our life. The tooth that came out just like that. The tooth that came out just like that. Imagine that, tooth, losing your teeth. It's such a sign of old age, and who wants to grow old, and lose their teeth? It's it's a sign of our impending doom, losing our teeth. And he frames it. Yeah, estimated 15,000 haiku that he wrote. So I'll close with my own haiku. Before I offer my own haiku, I'll share with you just a reminder that our practice is about being more and more able to tolerate discomfort. It's kind of what we're doing. It's the ability to tolerate the discomfort of our lives. And this doesn't mean that we need to like that. We don't need to like it. Here's my free-form haiku for you. Speed, going 85 miles per hour for enlightenment. Missing everything in between. All right. Thank you.